329 people are believed dead in the downing of Air India Flight 182 bound for Bombay from Toronto.
Air India Flight 182 remains the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history.
Even to date, Canadians really haven't embraced Air India as a Canadian tragedy.
Everyone perished on board, everybody. Right? The plane blows up over the south coast of Ireland and the Irish Sea.
Innocent people who had nothing to do with politics, who didn't believe in any causes.
There were 82 children under the age of 13.
And they were just enjoying their life, going to visit their family or have holiday with their friends.
You know, summer holidays, they're going to visit their homelands, they're Canadians.
329 people died in this attack, but the terrorists had planned for that number to be double.
The powers that be, political or law enforcement, failed the victims of Air India.
They won't be convicted, which is kind of sad because many of the people looking for closure.
Mr. Bobby, do you have anything to say to the families who lost 331 members?
It didn't feel like complete justice, no.
They felt here were some brown guys killing brown guys, and it wasn't anybody else's business.
Mr. Justice Major called it a cascading series of errors and things that went wrong. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
Well, you'd had problems within the Sikh community or the Indo-Canadian community for some time. There have been hate going on, violence going on even before the Golden Temple incidents in June of 1984 in India.
Mrs. Gandhi had ordered an end to the Sikh violence with a bloody army attack on the Golden Temple at Amritsar in June.
There had been an attack on the Golden Temple by Indian Army back in, I think, in 1984. And a lot of people were really upset. I think everybody, if you were Sikh, you were upset that the Indian government sent troops into Golden Temple, which is like the holiest place for the Sikh community. And a lot of innocent people were killed in that one. So there was a lot of tension that time.
There was very much anger in the Sikh community, especially the Sikh separatist group and the fundamentalist Sikh groups.
The thousands of people who gathered outside the hospital in New Delhi were shocked when the news of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's death was made public. Nearly 19 years after she first took power over the world's largest democracy, Indira Gandhi was struck down by a team of assassins. The 66-year-old Prime Minister was the victim of gunmen identified as Sikh extremists. Her murder the apparent culmination of a 2-year campaign of terror for the creation of an independent Sikh state.
But after the Golden Temple incidents, the violence took a turn for the worse. Broadcasters and journalists were being threatened for not towing the line of the extremists. And I had started speaking out against the violence at that time.
Now, for them to turn around and celebrate and express joy over the death of a human being who represented the country of 750 million, to which they belong themselves, is something of an anathema to me. I just can't understand that.
Rajiv Gandhi! Who's next? Rajiv Gandhi! Who's next? Rajiv Gandhi! Who's next? What was once a demand for autonomy is today a demand for freedom. Khalistan! Khalistan!
I was at home and I was watching the noon news and I saw a helicopter overhead at the Consul General's home and I saw 15 to 20 Khalistani extremists burning the flag, jumping over the fence and getting into a wrestling match with the police. So I felt it my obligation to stand up and speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. And I held my first press conference out of my law office, arguing that the vast majority of Sikhs didn't support the violence, didn't support the idea of a separate country, didn't support what happened in the Golden Temple either, but weren't in favor of the violence that was happening here or that was happening in India.
There's some of the people going around and making some statement, they're going to take a revenge against India by bringing the planes down or killing the Hindus and all that. So it was a very difficult time and the community was divided.
Ever since I started speaking out in August of '84, I had been getting threats. I had a trial Monday morning in the BC Supreme Court, 5-day trial, and I was carrying briefcases. I put them down next to my little car, and I was fumbling for keys in my pocket, jacket pocket, when I heard footsteps coming behind me. And moments later, there was a big thump over my head, and I turned around, and obviously this man who was over 6 foot tall had an iron bar in his hand and a crowbar, and was essentially, trying to kill me. And I put my hand on my head and broke my hand. My partner walked out of the building a few moments after I did, and he yelled and screamed, and the man ran away. Therefore, I survived. If he hadn't come, I probably wouldn't have survived. Well, this attack happened on February 8th, 1985, and the Air India happened, I believe, on June 23rd, 1985, within 4 months. In between, I wrote letters to the Prime Minister of Canada, to the various attorneys general and premiers, warning them that what was brewing within the community could lead to large-scale violence and murders. Please pay attention. Neither the police nor the politicians paid any attention.
I remember it being a beautiful summer, and we were so excited because we'd never met as young people. My auntie I had met when I was a very, very little baby, so no memory. And so here I was meeting this auntie, Simonicia, we called her Auntie Zeb, and Umar, Uncle Umar. They were from outside the city of Ahmedabad, close to a town called Jitali in the state of Gujarat in India. They were in the prime of their life. They were in their mid to late 40s. And they were here for the first time. They'd never come to Vancouver. They'd never been to Canada, the US. They were both doctors, and they came and stayed with us for quite a few days, and we took them everywhere. We were tourists in our hometown. It was the Vancouver of the 1980s, very different, less traffic. And I just remember a lot of laughter, a lot of fun, a lot of loud family discussions. We had a really good time with them. And I should mention, they had one son who was very little. I think he was between 4 and 5. Their son Irfan, who they loved immensely, and they missed him a lot. And we talked a lot about that because they had wanted to bring him on the trip, but just decided it was too much for him. So he was left behind in India.
My sister's name is Sukhvinder Kaur Uppal, niece Parminder Kaur Uppal, and nephew Kuldeep Singh Uppal. Actually, my sister sponsored us when I came to Canada, and we lived together, and we love each other. My sister, I think, is 36, 37 years old. My niece is 11 years old, nephew 10 years old. She taking the kids meet their grandparents in India. That's why she going for holiday. Actually, I told her to don't go because India is not very good situation that time. I came from India the same year. She said I want to go because their parents want to see the kids.
I had taken my children to India in 1983-84, Christmas, New Year season. I wanted to take them for an extended period of time in the summer break, and I decided I would do that. My brother kept pestering me because he said, you've actually forgotten the heat of the summers in India, and your kids are young, they're going to get sick, you're going to kill them. Don't go. He kept phoning me every day to just not go with the children. And finally, I relented. Well, I didn't know it was that very flight. I mean, I was just planning a trip. I didn't know that people had been threatening or saying, don't fly Air India. They've been saying that at the temples. I learned that afterwards.
In terms of political tensions, I think we had, I know my parents, and perhaps my aunt and uncle were very aware, but they certainly didn't talk about those things with us. I think it was only after the then subsequent terrible events that happened that I became much more aware of what was happening. We certainly did all go to the airport. My sister and I wouldn't normally do this, but very much remember that. At that time, at the airports, I remember you could go right up to inside the gate, and I remember my mom putting her hand on a glass divider to the connecting gate where my aunt and uncle would eventually go to say goodbye, and they held hands through the glass with their hands touching palm to palm. I can remember my dad taking a photo where, of course, my father's out of the shot, but my sister and I and my mom are standing saying goodbye to my aunt and uncle at Vancouver International Airport.
So before I tell you about what happened on June 23rd, 1985, I have to bring you back to the previous day, June 22nd, 1985. It was around 6:30 a.m. PT when a man named Manjeet Singh entered YVR Airport with a suitcase. A suitcase that contained a bomb. Manjeet Singh checks in for a Canadian Pacific flight heading from Vancouver to Toronto. And he insists to the check-in agent that he wants his suitcase to be transferred from the CP flight to Flight 182 once it arrives in Toronto. Now, reports indicate that there was some hesitation in this interaction, but the agent eventually agreed. The suitcase made its way to Toronto and successfully was transported to Flight 182, Air India. But Manjeet Singh was not on either one of those flights. From there, it then will depart to Heathrow International Airport in London, UK, a destination that it never reaches.
And I remember this phrase, you know, because my auntie was from a Muslim background, where at the Vancouver airport and then in the phone calls from Toronto, there was, you know, when we meet again, inshallah, if it be the will of Allah, when we meet again, inshallah. I remember that. Because then they boarded the flight that went from Vancouver to Toronto, as you say, to Montreal, and then that fateful journey over the Atlantic Ocean and the Irish Sea.
It was June 23rd, 1985, and it happened in the morning.
It was sort of early morning when the plane was flying over the Ireland, and the captain announced, you know, they're going to start serving the breakfast, and it's time to wake up. We are not too far from landing. The plane was full of people, young people, old people, kids, and people from all different backgrounds.
That's when Flight 182 lost all connection to ground control. That's when it is believed the bomb was detonated.
There was a big hole, one part of the flight, and then Air India flight just straight went down in the ocean when it was flying 31,000 feet above the ocean.
Killing all 329 people on board in what is still the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history. And of those 329 people, 268 were Canadian.
Innocent people who had nothing to do with politics, who didn't believe in any causes from any place, any part of the world, and they were just enjoying their life, going to visit their family or have a holiday with their friends.
That same day, June 23rd, there is an explosion in the baggage terminal at Tokyo Narita International Airport. 2 baggage handlers are killed in the incident.
It's not just 329 that were killed in Air India bombing. There was another bomb sent by CP Air to Tokyo.
The day prior, on June 22nd, 1985, just as Manjeet Singh was checking in his explosive suitcase on the CP flight from Vancouver to Toronto, there was another man at YVR Airport, a man identified as L. Singh. He also was checking in to a CP flight. This Canadian Pacific flight was traveling from Vancouver to Tokyo, Narita International Airport. At that time, it was known as the New Tokyo International Airport. And he instructed the agent to ensure his suitcase, which contained the second bomb, is transported from the CP flight to Air India Flight 301 once it arrives in Tokyo. That flight was to travel from Tokyo to Bangkok. So just take that in for a moment. 329 people died in this attack. But the terrorists had planned for that number to be double. And the only thing that saved the individuals on Air India Flight 301 was a simple mistake. The terrorists failed to factor in that Japan does not observe daylight savings time. This bomb exploded an hour earlier, as Air India Flight 182 was above the Atlantic Ocean. It actually exploded in the baggage terminal, killing 2 baggage handlers. So the total tally of deaths in Canada's worst terrorist attack in history, 331.
The downing of Air India Flight 182, worst commercial aviation disaster in history.
The Air India 747 jet was en route to India. It's believed that a bomb exploded on board,
killing 329 people. Most of them were Canadians, 86 of them were children.
News is spread all over the world. People have some concern if something is not right.
Somebody called me to say that Air India had gone down. That's how I found out. And my wife was there actually when I was talking on the phone. We were numb.
We were in Paris the day I will never forget. We first heard about the Air India plane crashing by Ireland. We thought it was just plain some disaster, but later on we found out it was blown up by bomb made in British Columbia by some terrorists.
It was only after the plane went down and I heard about it, I thought, oh my God, like my brother kind of saved me from this tragedy that has befallen other people. I didn't want to make it about me because I hadn't lost anybody. People had lost their families, and I wanted them to be able to deal with it.
Sunday morning, beautiful, still June morning. We were in the house at 820 Dublin Street, New Westminster, and it was a phone call, one of those terrible phone calls. It was early morning, and I'll never forget the sound of my father's voice. I was upstairs, he was downstairs. The phone call comes through, and there was something about his voice. I can't put my finger on it even to this day, 40 years later, but it was so awful that I just sat bolt upright in my bed. And then at some point, there was a low murmuring, my dad speaking to my cousin, and then letting my mom know, and just the sound of my mom screaming.
My brother-in-law and a friend of mine came to my workplace and they said, come to the house, there is some problem at home. And when I come home and lots of people was sitting in my house. It's very hard for us, you know. My parents was in India at that time and they are so upset. And I went to the Ireland after that.
My father and the uncle I've referenced who's now passed, and his wife, my beloved auntie, his wife, the three of them went to Ireland.
There appear to be no more bodies in the search zone, 120 miles off the southwest coast of Ireland. So far, 131 bodies have been recovered. 81 are now in a morgue in a Cork hospital.
Ireland people, they look after us, take us with the bus to the hospital every day. Like I take the dentist's report and they find out my sister and the kids' bodies. My sister, I think is 36, 37 years old. My niece is 11 years old and nephew 10 years old. I love those kids. It's really hard for me. You know, we live together, feel like it's my kid.
Oh, it's very, very painful memories, but you know, they found my aunt's body, but not my uncle's. So they repatriated my auntie's body to India. So they went from Canada to Ireland to Bombay, and then my aunt finally had her resting place back to the village where she was born, Chitali in Gujarat. But my uncle Umar's body was lost at sea. Irfan, my cousin, left orphaned in an instant, like so many children. I believe he was between 4 and 7. He was left orphaned. It's like unimaginable. He was so doted upon, the only son of these loving, lively parents. I think life was unbelievably hard. There were 82 children under the age of 13 who perished. You know, summer holidays, they're going to visit their homelands, they're Canadians.
Most of the lives are gone, only 100-something bodies were recovered during that time. The rest of nobody knows what happened to them.
It was just so unimaginable. So I think at the time, I don't remember having any thoughts about who's with us, who's for us. It was just the fog of shock and horror. And gradually it became very apparent that, yeah, our country didn't really understand what was going on.
The Boeing 747 jet blew apart and crashed into the North Atlantic, killing 329 people. Most of them were Canadians, 86 of them were children.
It's now been 40 years since the Air India bombings. In the wake of the nation's deadliest attack, an investigation would ensue, spanning nearly 2 decades.
We are talking about 329 people who basically were murdered. It's probably the largest murder case in Canada.
The man was arrested between home and work.
This investigation has now reached an acute stage.
But certainly forensic evidence is a major part.
So you expected this today, sir?
Yes.
And why? Could you spell that out for me?
Because I'm innocent.
Crown was not able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Mr. Boggan, do you have anything to say to the families who lost 331 members?
It didn't feel like complete justice, no.
Do you want to tell us about what happened?
I'm sorry, I cannot answer.
Justice was never served.
Transcripts weren't taken, false affidavits were sworn.
Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
I blame the government, they didn't do the proper investigation.
They were certainly negligent. The powers that be, political or law enforcement, he failed the victims of Air India.
Shortly after this attack in 1985, the government formed the Air India Flight 182 Task Force. It was comprised of members from the RCMP, CSIS, the Department of Foreign Affairs, and the Solicitor General, with the goal of finding the reasoning behind this attack and security shortfalls that led to this happening.
They set up a special office here in Vancouver in the RCMP E division.
RCMP have always said they know who did the bombing, but didn't have the evidence to prove it.
The RCMP and the CSIS, CSIS was brand new at that time. They'd been at loggerheads with each other over some issues, and then they abandoned the pursuit of these people. They heard an explosion on the island conducted by some of the people involved in the Air India tragedy. And they abandoned the pursuit thinking it was some ceremonial explosion that Sikhs had done on the island. And that was like shocking.
And sadly enough, they were all being followed by CSIS and other Canadian intelligence agencies when the bomb was being made.
They had ended the surveillance on those that they suspected of organizing violent events.
They were not able to stop the bombing.
How come any explosive devices can be board on any flight? This is a lack of security, mismanagement somehow.
And then about a year into the investigation, they burnt the tapes.
And sadly enough, before the Air India trial, all the evidence that was collected by CSIS was destroyed.
There were so many very credible evidence. RCMP spent many years to collect those evidence. And finally they said, oh, suddenly we have erased those tapes. We have erased those evidence. We don't know what happened.
All of the tapes, wiretap tapes that they had done for these guys, and they'd burnt them. Some people think that's that must have been an inside job. I think it was just sheer negligence. I don't believe that the RCMP or CSIS would knowingly destroy the evidence or wiretap evidence against the suspects. Part of the problem, we didn't have that many Indo-Canadian brown-looking police officers at that time. You could count them on fingertips at that time. They didn't have as many informers. They didn't speak many, The police generally didn't speak the language. If they had had the cultural and linguistic know-how, if they had had informers, if they had had people who spoke the language, knew the culture within the law enforcement, I suspect the charges would have been quicker and the prosecution may have been successful.
On June 23, 1985, 329 souls perished when a bomb on Air India Flight 182 exploded as it was over the Atlantic Ocean, killing everyone on board. Of them, 268 were Canadian. At the time, it was the worst terrorist attack in the aviation sector in history.
At this point, there appear to be no more bodies in the search zone, 120 miles off the southwest coast of Ireland. So far, 131 bodies have been recovered. 81 are now in a morgue in a Cork hospital.
There's a reward attached. It's probably the largest murder case in Canada.
Well, what do we know about the suspects? Well, there's first Inderjeet Singh Rayat, a Duncan, BC man, and in fact, he was the only one out of the 4 suspects who actually got convicted. In 2003, he pleaded guilty, being sentenced to 30 years in prison, eventually serving about 26. The next suspect, Talwinder Singh Parmar. Now, he was a high-up member of a militant group named Babar Khalsa. He was a well-known Sikh separatist leader here in BC.
But it was the Babar Khalsa International, that was a terrorist group. Their leader was Talwinder Singh Babbar, and he led this organization for many years.
The next suspect, we have Rapudaman Singh Malik, a wealthy Vancouver businessman who was also not convicted in this case. The fourth suspect, Ajaib Singh Bagri, a BC mill worker, also not convicted. And to date, only one person has been convicted. Let's look back at the key timeline of events. November 1985, RCMP raid the homes of Talwinder Singh Parmar and Inderjeet Singh Rayat.
Why were they brought here to Duncan? Can you tell us that?
I have no idea.
They lay various weapons, explosives, and conspiracy charges. The result? Rayat is convicted of weapons offenses and fined $2,000. Charges against Parmar are dropped, and no link to the Air India bombings is established. A dead end that would become one of the many in the investigation.
Watch your head when you get in. Watch your head.
February 1988, Rayat, a mechanic, is arrested in England and charged with making the bomb that exploded at Narita International Airport.
Ottawa is attempting to extradite Inderjeet Singh Rayat from Great Britain.
He would be extradited to Canada, and following a lengthy trial, Rayat would be convicted of 2 counts of manslaughter and 4 explosive charges related to the Narita Airport bomb explosion.
In 1991, Mr. Rayat was convicted in BC Supreme Court for manslaughter in relation to the June 1985 explosion.
Inderjeet Singh Rayat of BC is now serving 10 years for the bombing of a plane in Japan's Narita Airport.
Rayat, to date, would become the only suspect convicted in relation to the Air India bombings.
You have had one person convicted of manufacturing the bomb, and that was Mr. Rayat, and also of perjury, because the person didn't want to give up the other co-conspirators with him.
October 15th, 1992, police in India announced the death of Parmar.
Talwinder Singh Parmar, he traveled to India in 1992, and he was wanted there, but somehow he knew his life is in risk, and later he was arrested in Punjab by the Punjab police, and he was died in the police encounter.
At the time, the police say he was killed in a gun battle in Bombay. The circumstances surrounding his death have since been contested. In 1995, journalist Tara Singh Hayer delivers a statement to the RCMP.
Well, my dad, what he heard was the same Puribal had told them that there's some people accusing some other people doing the Air India bombing. Apparently, I'm just paraphrasing, this person said actually they did the bombing and not these other people, and he admitted. And my dad had heard that information. It's all in affidavit. It's a public information, and
I think police has got now enough evidence to convince judge beyond reasonable doubt, but still I don't know why they are keep on just putting it away.
My dad did tell me before that the police had talked to him and made some video recording of his interviews. And then he said they also asked them to go through lie detector test before the interviews were done. But I didn't know about the affidavit part was there. So when he talked to the police, providing information, and the police did, I think, multiple lie detecting tests, and he passed them all, then recorded his information. Because my dad knew it's possible that people will try to kill him, because they tried to shoot him in 1988 when he wrote in his newspaper which group did the Air India. And he implied in there, and the police did not translate that part of the news until much later after my dad was shot. Even when he went to the hospital in 1988, and the doctor thought, he would not survive. I remember talking to him, and I said, Dad, you have paid a very heavy price but this is Air India investigation, and your stand on that and reporting on it. There has been bomb threats to blow up your newspaper office. And I said, maybe it's time for you to either shut down the newspaper, maybe sell the newspaper, maybe just spend time with the family. And he said to me, Dave, should everybody testify, provide information about the Air India bombing, people who were involved in it? I said, yes. You think it was the wrong thing to do? I said, yeah, it was the wrong thing to do. And so you think people should stand up and provide information? I said, yes. He said, you think my life is more important than their life? If asking other people to sacrifice their life by standing up against the terrorists and the people who did the Air India bombing and provided evidence, and their life will be threatened just like mine. And if I can't stand up myself and risk my life, I can't ask anybody else. While I'm alive, I'm going to do the right thing. That is, don't keep on reporting. If my life is risked, so be it. We're all going to die one day. We could be dying from a cancer or heart attack. So he said we might as well do the right thing while we're alive, because that way, every day when you die, you can say you did the best thing you could in your life.
On November 18th, 1998, Hayer is shot dead in Surrey, and after his death, all evidence that he presented becomes inadmissible in court.
The night my dad was shot in November 1998, I received a call from my sister to come to Dad's home, and they didn't tell me anything more. I said, okay, I'll start driving. It's about, at that time, around 20-minute drive. Start thinking, I said, there must be something more serious, because otherwise they were taken to hospital. I had heard emergency vehicles passing me when I tried to go towards the police, and they said, oh, this is blocked, you can't go in. I said, that's my dad in there. And my dad's body was partially in the wheelchair, partially going towards the car. And there was a lot of blood there, and that was a very difficult day, and I will never forget that day, and neither will my family.
In 2000, RCMP arrest Ripudaman Singh Malik and Ajaib Singh Bagri in connection with the bombing of Air India Flight 182. The charges include 331 counts of first-degree murder. In October of 2001, the RCMP arrest Rayat on 7 new charges, including murder, attempted murder, conspiracy in the Air India bombing. April 28, 2003. The trial of Malik and Bagri begins.
It's as horrendous as this one to ensure that these two accused get a fair trial. That's the challenge.
Their trial took almost a year here in Vancouver Supreme Court. They made a special courtroom in the BC Supreme Court in the basement, high security courtroom in the Canadian history. So trial took several months. For Omni, I covered it almost, and I was the one lead reporter who was covering the Air India trial. And every day it was very emotional day when you heard something like the RCMP present something. Everybody, end of the day, is a human being. We were emotional, and family members were emotional. We were covering this trial and giving the news every day what happened inside the court. And also we were hearing the stories from the victim family members, their relatives. They were telling their heartbroken stories to us. Again, they were looking forward to the justice. Every day they say, oh, today something came out good. So we have a hope. When the trial completed, everybody was very frustrated. The community at large, and especially the family members of those victims.
On March 16, 2005, Malik and Bagri are acquitted of all charges. The BC Supreme Court rules key witnesses to be biased and unreliable.
Today, Mr. Justice Josephson found me not guilty of all the criminal charges laid against me in October 2000.
Crown was unable to prove sufficient case against these two suspects, and they acquitted in 2005.
I do remember that day when the verdict was given, and I remember my husband sitting beside me and my mom, and I think Irfan by then had gone back to India. It was just so horrific. The calls and cries from the family when we realized it took so long through the investigation to get to the trial, and then for a full acquittal. It didn't feel like complete justice, no.
So you expected this today, sir?
Yes.
And why? Could you spell that out for me?
Because I'm innocent.
Doesn't matter what they do, they won't be convicted, which is kind of sad because many of the people looking for closure. So I'm in shock the judge found them innocent.
I'm trained as a lawyer, and I believe in our system of reasonable doubt and not convicting someone if they're not found in a court of law to be guilty. But this seems so unfair.
Because Crown was not able to prove beyond reasonable doubt.
We think we get justice, but they said no evidence. That's why they let them go, you know.
Mr. Bobby, do you have anything to say to the families who lost 331 members?
They were angry, and it was big anger in the community and especially in the family members. They did not get justice.
I blame the government, you know. They didn't do the proper investigation.
And there was such a cascading series of errors and omissions as the inquiry subsequently found. It was just a terrible time, almost worse than hearing the deaths so many years earlier. I think it was like a 25-year, 20-year span.
130 million Canadian dollars of taxpayer money was put into this process, only for one of the four suspects to actually be convicted in this case. February 10th, 2003, Rayat pleads guilty to one count of manslaughter.
Today in British Columbia Supreme Court, before the Honorable Chief Justice Donald Brenner, Inderjit Singh Rayat pleaded guilty to one count of manslaughter in relation to his role in the explosion and crash of Air India Flight 182. His actual sentence for his role in the Narita bombing and the explosion of Air India Flight 182 with the deaths of the 329 individuals amounts to 25 years in prison.
You have had one person convicted of manufacturing the bomb, and that was Mr. Rayat, and also of perjury, because the person didn't want to give up the other co-conspirators with him.
I talked to Justice Major, who did the Air India inquiry after the Air India bombing. I remember talking to him. He said, you know, he really believes if your dad was alive, there would have been some people convicted for Air India bombing. And he said, what happened? Your dad was wrong. Your dad was killed to stop him from testifying as a witness at the Air India bombing.
The powers that be, political or law enforcement, he failed the victims of Air India.
transcripts weren't taken, false affidavits were sworn.
If they had had the cultural and linguistic know-how, if they had had informers, if they had had people who spoke the language, knew the culture within the law enforcement, I suspect the charges would have been quicker and the prosecution may have been successful.
"329 people are believed dead in the downing of Air India Flight 182.
Air India Flight 182 remains the worst terrorist attack in Canadian history.
Even to date, Canadians really haven't embraced Air India as a Canadian tragedy.
Everyone perished on board, everybody. Right? The plane blows up over the south coast of Ireland and the Irish Sea.
Innocent people who had nothing to do with politics, who didn't believe in any causes.
There were 82 children under the age of 13.
And they were just enjoying their life, going to visit their family or have holiday with a friend.
I wrote letters to the Prime Minister of Canada and premiers warning them that what was brewing within the community could lead to large-scale violence and murders. The powers that be, political or law enforcement, failed the victims of Air India.
He won't be convicted.
It didn't feel like complete justice, no.
They felt here were some brown guys killing brown guys. It wasn't anybody else's business.
In my dad's case, look, he tried to help the police. She said they killed him because of what he wrote in the newspaper.
They burnt the tapes.
Mr. Justice Major called it a cascading series of errors and things that went wrong. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
It was not recognized as the largest aviation mass murder in the world's history until 9/11. Until then, this was the largest aviation mass murder, and it was engineered by Canadians from Canadian soil. We, as a society and our governments, did not respond to the moment.
Many of the Canadian government people thought, there was Indians killing Indians. I mean, I don't know how people can live with them killing so many innocent people.
It was just so unimaginable. So I think at the time, I don't remember having any thoughts about who's with us, who's for us. It was just the fog of shock and horror. And gradually it became very apparent that, our country didn't really understand what was going on as a whole, I would say. And our government certainly didn't at that time.
It was the talk in the community too. They said the Canadian government did not took it very serious because they said it was the other country's flight, other country's airline, and they say they were not that serious to investigate it.
Nothing we can do because Canadian government said it's Indian tragedy, and India said it's Canada tragedy. Nobody cared about that time,
They felt here were some brown guys killing brown guys, and it wasn't anybody else's business, and therefore let the things go on as they might.
June 22nd, 2010, 25 years after the bombings, Prime Minister Stephen Harper delivers a public apology.
Your pain is our pain. As you grieve, so we grieve. And as the years have deepened your grief, so has the understanding of our country grown. This was not an act of foreign violence. This atrocity was conceived in Canada, executed in Canada, by Canadian citizens, and its victims were themselves mostly citizens of our country.
Well, an apology is always gratefully accepted. Actions speak louder than words. The fact that people could put bombs on planes, I think, was a terrible thing. And all the systemic problems with how security was run in those days. And then since 9/11, we've had to go through so many more things. And as frustrating as it is at airports, believe me, I think of that. There's not a flight I take, and it's very, very hard to fly even now, that I don't think about security measures and how do we protect people without violating all kinds of other rights? How do we get that balance? So apologies are important when they're official, but actions speak louder than words.
We do wish that this realization had gained common acceptance earlier. However, it is this understanding which guides the actions of our government today.
What do you think of the verdict? What do you think of the verdict? Excuse me, Ted. Excuse me. Yes, I'm sorry. So you expected this today, sir?
Yes.
And why? Could you spell that out for me?
Because I'm innocent.
I'm trained as a lawyer, and I believe in our system of reasonable doubt and not convicting someone if they're not found in a court of law to be guilty. But this seems so unfair. And it really, I think, mobilized the families to work very hard to demand from the government. And eventually it was the Harper government, in fact, that called this inquiry.
In one of the very first acts of our government, we appointed retired Justice John Major to scrutinize without limit the investigation of the bombing of Air India Flight 182.
There was such a cascading series of errors and omissions as the inquiry subsequently found the Major Commission, which was exhaustive and detailed and I think very good, although it was not charged with redoing the trial, of course, so it didn't find criminal intent, but it went very much into detail on all the things that went wrong and had a whole section where we, the family members, could give testimony, as I did, as my cousin did, on behalf of our family. I thought that was a very important part in this long, complex journey.
6 days ago, Commissioner Major issued his second report, a thorough examination of events and deeply disturbing. For although Commissioner Major's report runs to 3,000 pages, although it summarizes the testimony of hundreds of witnesses, although it shines a light on institutional processes that the Commissioner referred to in some cases as a dysfunctional focus on self-justification, it can still be reduced to a few words. This should not have happened. This should not have happened.
Particularly after the inquiry, where I heard other family testimonies, I was so struck by the commonality. We felt embarrassed, we felt ashamed, we didn't want to talk about it. It was so horrifically painful, it was so triggering.
I can't say who I can blame, you know. It's government, I blame the government, you know. They didn't do the proper investigation or anything.
I talked to Justice Major, who did the Air India inquiry after the Air India bombing. I remember talking to him. He said, you know, he really believes that if your dad was alive, there would have been some people convicted for Air India bombing. And he said, what happened to your dad was wrong. Your dad was killed to stop him from testifying as a witness at the Air India bombing. And he said that if he had testified, that we would probably have a different verdict in Air India trial than what we had. And he said police really failed him, that they should protect him better.
And in 2010, the findings of this inquiry were quite eye-opening.
At the time, there's so much trauma and shock that detailed inquiry, and it showed, I think that Mr. Justice Major called it a cascading series of errors and things that went wrong. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
So many very credible evidence. RCMP spent many years to collect those evidence, and finally they said, oh, suddenly we have erased those tapes, we have erased those evidence, we don't know what happened. So if you have like the very solid evidence, those evidence could change the whole scenario.
Commissioner Major delivered a damning indictment of many things that occurred before and after the fact. Things, ladies and gentlemen, that this government of Canada cannot defend that this government has no wish to defend. And Commissioner Major finds that to make matters worse, the families of the victims were for years after treated with scant respect or consideration by agencies of the Government of Canada. The government that called this inquiry now apologize.
Well, I'm no expert. I have no criminal law background. I've put a lot of it aside. All these years later, I feel that justice was not done because the people in the community who knew things perjured themselves. The people involved, the perpetrators, perjured themselves. I believe one of them lied. It was found by law 27 times. So when people lie under oath, when they're too frightened to give the truth, when there's a culture in a community that will not reveal what actually happened, who put the bombs on the plane, and then all the politics that have since arisen, it's just horrible for family members, you know. You do want justice done. I believe in our justice system, but it was very, very hard, and it still is, to feel that that was a fair decision or an investigation that found the truth. Very hard on the family members, I think. And I can't speak for other family members, some of whom are much, much more critical, and I understand that. It shakes your belief in fairness.
At this point, there appear to be no more bodies in the search zone.
The Air India 747 jet was en route to India. It's believed that a bomb exploded on board,
killing 329 people. Most of them were Canadians, 86 of them were children.
40 years to this day since this tragedy happened. 40 years. But do we hear about it? Do our officials remember it? Do we teach it in schools? There is an entire community that is still feeling the impacts of this attack. But is our country talking about it? Those are the real questions that come to my mind.
Even to date, Canadians really haven't embraced Air India as a Canadian tragedy. I mean, its name kind of says it's Air India, it's not Air Canada. Perhaps if it had been Air Canada, we might have had a different response. You know, look, there is racism in this society, deeply embedded, conscious and unconscious, and we're all victims of it, one way or another. You know, if you had 329 or 30 white passengers from Canada being killed in a bombing, the reaction of the Canadian government and Canadian society would have been different. I've said that many times. I have no shame in saying that because it's true. But even today, to date, other than Prime Minister Harper and Prime Minister Martin, no Prime Minister in the country has given the Air India tragedy its due, understanding that it really struck at the heart of the Indo-Canadian community.
Nobody take any responsibility.
No, justice is not served. The people who died at that time, lots of people, they were young, lots of people, they were in their age of 40s, 50s, 60s. Now their kids are 40, 50s, and those people, they have their children too. Everybody asking what happened, and those people are still waiting for the justice, but I believe they will never get justice.
I forget the details now of the one person who was found guilty and what he was actually found guilty of, but it didn't feel like complete justice, no. That wound will never heal. There is no closure, and I feel I speak for myself only in this, that what I have come to see 40 years later is it doesn't get easier, it gets harder, and that's why my heart just goes out to people who may have, through terrible circumstances, found themselves losing loved ones to mass casualty events. It doesn't necessarily get easier.
justice was not done. In my dad's case, look, he tried to help the police to make sure everything he can do, he did. He tried to provide information to the public to speak up against it. A lot of the friends of my dad, our family friends, they said, you know, if he had been not Indo-Canadian, maybe they would have found different result. Even in Air India case, they sort of say if the victims were all from Quebec or Ontario, Caucasian, they would not have destroyed the evidence. They would have laid charges right away. They would arrest the people who did Air India bombing much sooner.
Ojjwal Dosanjh, a Vancouver lawyer, himself a Sikh, he deplores the acts of violence in his homeland.
I actually did think about, deliberately think about whether or not I should speak out initially. And I said to myself, look, I'm an activist on human rights, on farm workers' rights, domestic workers' rights. I've run twice. I'm a lawyer. If I don't speak out, would I ever be able to look myself in the mirror and say that I'm an okay human being? Like, there are moments when you need to make those decisions. And I perhaps wasn't the only qualified people to speak on this issue, but I was one of the few across this country that made a decision to speak out. And hopefully we as a society are more cognizant of the kind of violence that can happen. Although I'm not sure whether the politicians are more cognizant, because we see all kinds of violence and hate being preached. The police haven't acted. The politicians haven't condemned those things. Have we really learned anything? I hope we have, but I don't get that impression from what I've just said.
This year is the 40th anniversary of this tragic incident. Still, family members get together every year here in Vancouver at the Air India Memorial site.
And our family, we lost 3 members.
But still, they are grieving. They will grieve forever. Their generation will grieve forever.
Today, we say their names matter, their stories matter.
And so there's this like an ecosystem of family members. They all have loved ones, and there were multi-generations, there were whole families that were obliterated. And if we think of recent events with mass casualties, the horrificness of like a quick act of terror that takes away whole families. My cousin had to deal with all of that, plus losing both his parents at a young age. And somehow he has. I'm in awe of him, honestly, and all the members of all the families who've gone on with their lives and have done really incredible things. And 40 years later, we're on to the new generations of survivors.
It is about standing in unwavering solidarity with the families who have carried the burden of gun loss for 40 years.
Do you have a moment where you look at your wife and you look at your children and you think, what if?
Well, my children are all born within the years 73 to 78 inclusive. The youngest one would have been 11, and the other one 5 or 6 years. They were very young. In the calmer moments of my life, when I sit back and I look at them, like, just a couple of days ago, all 3 of them, we had brunch with some other people, and at that moment I was kind of thinking, wow, we probably all would have vanished like all the others, right?
I think my father was a very special person. In my father, he didn't spend enough time looking after the interests of the family, but he spent interests of the whole society, all innocent human being. He believed in democracy, freedom of press, and speak up against the people who do bad things, or especially the one who are using hate and violence to create terrorism or kill innocent people. I think while I'm alive, I'm going to continue with the same principle, believing in freedom of press, believing in democracy, making sure we don't use hate and violence to get our way.
तो ते आ गया अरदास हमारी जियो पिंड सब तेरा
ਕਹੋ ਨਾਨਕ ਸਭ ਤੇਰੀ ਵਡਿਆਈ.
We're gonna come every year on the site, memorial, on the memorial. We're gonna pray. Sister's gonna be around 75, 76 years old, and I always remember her. And my niece is 51, and my nephew is 50 years old. Nephew always said, I'm going to be policeman when I grow up. Very smart kids. But I love those kids. It's really hard for me.
So Benicia, we called her Auntie Zeb, and Umar, Uncle Umar. I think about them a lot. They'd be in their 80s. I don't think about what their life would have been like. I think about Irfan, his two sons. I'm very, very proud of that family unit. He and his wife and his children, and how they are. You know, they're generous and positive and energetic. It's such a heartbreaking question. I would like them to be remembered as very skilled, talented healers. They healed people, they helped people. They were kind, generous, funny, loving, and they did things to help people. Yeah. I think about that a lot. If they had to die in such a horrific way, will I live my life for good? They lived their life for good. So